How did being in space change your perspective on what it means to be a human? And
That's one thing, is that I think we're living in a paradise. And I know there's a lot of bad stuff going on, but the planet itself, I think, is beautiful and perfect.
But you met Neil Armstrong.
I got a chance to meet him as a new astronaut for the first time and asked him, well, how did he come up with the thing he said on the moon?
You claim that he gave you some comically misguided advice.
That advice I got was the worst advice I ever got in my life.
A lot of military pilots have claims to, have run-ins with unidentified vehicles.
Yeah.
What's your take on that? Do you think we're alone?
As far as like the UFOs go, I think a lot of it is...
Mike, super stoked to have you here. Thanks for joining me today on the Mark Divine Show.
Mark, thanks very much for having me. My pleasure to be here.
So what's the funniest thing that ever happened to you in space? I know from a Navy SEAL, people say, oh yeah, you did a lot of scary shit. I'm like, yeah, but it was absolutely the most hysterical time of my life. What's it like in space? What's the humor like?
It's actually, I think pretty good. You try to keep it loose.
Right.
Did you always have like one guy who was a funny guy on your team?
There was always the one guy who was the funniest, but generally everyone, ended up having a really unique humor kind of contribution, I would say.
Yeah.
It was part of the team.
I remember as a new astronaut, there was a French astronaut named Michel Tonini who had flown in space, and we were in a meeting together, and he said something to me. He says, Mike, on every space crew, you need to have one funny guy. You need to have one funny guy to keep, and he goes, but only one, Mike. You can't have two. If you have two, it becomes like a gang, and nothing gets accomplished. You just screw around the whole time. But you need that one funny guy. A lot of our fun happened in training, too, and it was all fun. I don't know, the story that's coming to mind for me is just like a stupid thing I did. I don't know if it's funny or not, but when we were spacewalking in the sunlight, it could get pretty bright out, and you'd have this gold visor that you put down in front of your head, in front of your face, so it'd block out the sun. But in the darkness, it's like the darkest. So in the sunlight, it's the brightest bright I've ever experienced in space. It's like the pure white light. The sun illuminates everything so brightly. And if you have it in your eyes, you're not going to be able to get anything done, so you protect your eyes so you can see and see what's going on. Anyway, but when we go into the darkness, you'd want to raise that visor. You wouldn't be able to see anything because it's really dark, and then the visor on top of it, you won't see anything. We used to practice this even in the pool. Like we would time it, every 45 minutes, coming up on a sunrise, raise your visor, or close your visor, coming up on a sunset. But what happened is when we were out there, I was working inside of the telescope. It was my third spacewalk. And I was, this is my first one on my second mission, but my third, so I should have known what I was doing. But I was out there and I was doing a lot of work in the telescope, and I never put my visor down because the sun, I wasn't in the direct sunlight for whatever reason. The attitude of the spaceship, my visor was always up. I kind of got out of that habit. And then we went into sunlight toward the end, at the very end of the spacewalk. Boom, we got about an hour left, and we hit the sun. Like, whoa, and it was right in my, so I put down my visor. But again, I wasn't in that sequence, Mark, and everything's about sequence, right? You do something, you're not out of sequence, and you get messed up. So I had this visor down, but I wasn't, again, into this routine of up and down. We go into darkness, just as as my buddy's already inside the spaceship, and I'm taking care of our safety tethers, which is kind of an important thing. Out of the spaceship, and I have my visor down, but forget my visor's down, and the sun goes down, and it gets really dark, and I can't see a thing. And I've got my helmet lights, and I'm trying to, correct these things to where they're supposed to go. But I can't see a darn thing. It was really weird. Like, I was exhausted. It was a long EVA. And I was like, geez, I don't know what's happening here. Maybe I'm blacking out or I'm going to die. And it was really weird. Like, I didn't want to say anything like, hey, Houston, I think I'm dying. I didn't want to say anything like that. I was like, I think I can get through this, right? That's bad because it would excite a lot of people. So I just kind of was like, oh, wow, this would be really something if I died out here. I'm sure Bueno would get me back in. It's like really weird what was going through my head. And then, I did what I needed to do, and I somehow get back to the airlock. And then in the airlock, there's a lot of reflective material, or at least some of the metal in there. And I see my visors on. Oh, my goodness. So that's the problem, you idiot. You had your visor down. You couldn't see a damn thing. So then I get inside the spaceship, and my buddy, who was a rookie, was looking out over us. He goes, you had your visor down at the end. They go, yeah, no kidding. Why didn't you say something? I could have I could have done something dumb out there. I didn't know what was going on. I couldn't see a thing. And he goes, I didn't want to embarrass you. I go, you don't want to embarrass me. What? It would be more embarrassing if I couldn't see what I was doing and floated away or, I don't know. And then we get back for the debriefs, and he says, you know what I'm going to do during our debriefs? I go, what's that? He says, I want to tell everybody how I made a mistake and didn't tell you. I go, you're not saying a word now. The time to speak up was during the flight. Not during the beepers. Like Max was out there in the darkness with his visor down. That's not going to be good. So I don't know. That's what like stupid things that come up for whatever reason. That's the first thing that came to
That's
mind.
a good one, though. I like that. Probably never happened again after that, did it?
No, you learn your lesson. But that happened to other people. One of my classmates years earlier said that he was out there and he didn't understand why he couldn't see anything, and he had his visor down during the darkness. And I remember that. I go, oh, that's pretty stupid.
You think that they would have them now where it's automatic, or that tech is probably coming soon?
I guess sooner or later, I think there is technology that can do, like when you're, I guess for glasses, for eyeglasses, when
Right,
you're out there in
just
the
changes.
sunlight doing, for military purposes, or, you're flying an airplane. It would be nice if it was able to, if the visor would be able to change. But with space travel, like doing that, to make a change like that would be so expensive. And as long as it works, we kind of stick with what we have. But I agree with you. I think eventually, based on the lighting conditions out there spacewalking, you probably want something to change automatically so you don't have to go through that. Never mind forgetting it, but just take the time to have to change it. And it's not going to be optimal. It's either one or the
Right.
other.
Were you a shuttle guy? I mean, did you catch that, or did you have to take the Russian?
No, I was a shuttle guy. I arrived in 1996. I was picked up by NASA. And as it turned out, Mark, we didn't know this at the time. That was exactly the halfway mark. Because the first shuttle flight was in 1981, so we were picked 15 years after the shuttle started. And then the final shuttle flight was in 2011, 15 years later. So the whole program ran for 30 years, and I showed up right in the middle of it and was able to be a part of the last half of the shuttle program. And never went up on Soyuz.
You had 3 trips out
Two.
to.
I had 2 missions. Both of my missions were the Hubble Space Telescope.
How long would the training be? Let's say they said, "Hey, Mike, you're tagged for this mission." Is that going to be like 18 months out or 3 years out, or does it depend on the mission?
Yeah, it kind of depends on the mission, Mark, and things get delayed sometimes. They have to get a crew together much more quickly for some reason. But typically, the way the flow goes, and I think it's kind of similar to this now, you get selected. When you're first selected, you're an astronaut candidate, or what they call us ASCANs. So you're an ASCAN.
Ask.
Yeah. Yeah, so
love
just to stick it to you a little bit. So you're an ASCAN typically for about 2 years. It's like astronaut college, and you learn stuff. That also gives them the right to get rid of you if they don't like you. But typically that doesn't happen. But by that point, when you get to selection, it's a very success-oriented program. So it's 2 years of the basic training, and then you're qualified to be assigned. And then in most cases, it's still, in my case, it was another 2 more years until I got assigned. And then once I got assigned, to answer your question, it really depends. My first mission was, Hubble was a lot of spacewalking time, so we to schedule us in the pool and to do that in an appropriate way that we could learn and work stuff out. It's about an 18-month cycle. My second flight ended up being a 2.5-year cycle because we got delayed for a few times, which was fine, gave us more time to get ready. But I think that's about right. I think now it's a bit different now. They can assign people a lot more quickly to when the flight is coming up. The vehicle you're training on is almost like an automatic vehicle. So the shuttle required so much training because it was manually intensive. That required lots and lots of training.
Now you're just a passenger, right? Like in the
Pretty
SpaceX.
much. In fact, they don't even train. This boggled my mind because when I showed up in NASA in 1996, and I wasn't even a pilot. Like, the pilot astronauts, the test pilots who actually flew the vehicle with the control stick, landing it and so on, their training was so intensive. But for us as mission specialists, we still had to know how to work the vehicle and work the robotics and stuff like that. We showed up and they handed us this gigantic manual. It was called a SCOM, Shuttle Crew Operator's Manual. It's like a giant thing with like thousands of pages. They here, learn this. And we had like 2 years of, that 2 years of training. And a lot of it was learning how to, working on the shuttle and the simulators and so on. But it was shuttle centric. Now they don't even talk about the vehicle that you're going to launch on. They worry about that after you get assigned. So you're going to learn about the space station and doing spacewalks and things like that. And then after you're assigned to a mission and they know what spaceship you're going to go on, whether it's a Soyuz or the Dragon SpaceX vehicle.
If we ever get the Star Launch Alliance,
If you ever get my friend back with the spaceship that they're hogging up, then someone else could maybe use it. And that would be the third option right now of how you could get there. But right now,
I'm not sure I want to fly on that one, to tell you the truth.
I think they're going to clear it. It's going to be okay. They're going to figure out they're okay to come home in that thing now.
Yeah, I figured they probably are.
Yeah. We'll see how they react to it if they decide another test flight before they put a full crew on board or what they're going to do. But yeah.
Man, that's what happens when you put too many layers of bureaucracy between you and the final product, right?
It's more like, I think it's like I don't know if a PR move, I don't know. It's just that when they launched these guys, they said it was nine days, but that was really the minimum. And you never really want to stay up there for that short amount of time. That would be the minimum. It could be like 9 days, but I don't know what the max was, a few months or something like that. But a lot of it's based on traffic and logistics. But if they could keep them up there longer, they typically want to at that type of mission. Like even when the SpaceX vehicle first launched, I don't remember the minimum time was, but they ended up keeping those guys up there longer than expected. And that's usually an advantage because you spend all this effort to get up there, leave the people up there. There's plenty of supplies there. There's room for them up there. Why go through all that expense and then bring them home right away? So I think what happened here is that because they had these problems with the Starliner that are currently going on right now at the time of this recording, they had some issues with some of the thrusters, which weren't necessarily life-threatening, but something they want to get right and study if they have the extra time. And they're extending. They might have extended anyway, but when you combine that problem with the extension, people think that they're extending because of the problem. And really, it's more that I think they would have wanted to extend them anyway, even if they didn't have that problem with the thrusters.
Yeah. It's an optics issue, I guess.
Yeah, people think, oh, they're stuck. First of all, they're stuck in a really nice place.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind being stuck up there as long as I could get back, yeah.
People with the cash are paying, tens of millions of dollars as tourists to go up there and take a look. These guys are, they're both Navy officers and I think they're still active duty, but whatever, they're up there getting their salary to do, which is not a lot, but, it's their job, and they're hanging out. So I guess some of the news I've done, they say, oh, is it terrible that they're stuck up there? I go, well, it's like being stuck in San Diego, Mark, or, oh, man, I got to stay in Hawaii an extra week. What am I going to do with myself? So they're in a really desirable location, and I'm sure they're eating it up and having fun.
That does remind me of being in the teams. Like we would always break down, air quote, break down in the most beautiful places.
Yeah.
Because the flight crews are like, well, I think we'll just stay here in Hawaii a couple days. The plane broke again. We're like,
yeah, exactly. If you could pull that off. But the real break, usually that happens somewhere where you don't necessarily want to be.
That's right.
You can't get
out.
out.
Want to be there. The Bahrain or something.
Yeah. I was thinking like somewhere in the United States with a broken airplane. Never mind those places. That's a whole different story.
That's a different story.
Yeah.
Hi, Mark Devine here from SealFit. After 2 years of development, I'm super stoked to announce the launch of SealFit supplements and our first product, SealFit Electro Greens. This is the highest quality organic greens you can find, combined with electrolytes into one powerful supplement. Take with 8 ounces of water in the morning or add to your smoothie to get your day kicked off right with the proper nutritional supplementation and hydration support. And you can also use it as a pick-me-up booster during the day or after a workout. It dissolves immediately, and believe it or not, it tastes great. I've had many testimonials already saying it's the best tasting greens that they have ever tried. So, hoo-yah, SealFitSupplements.com, or you can find it on Amazon by searching for SealFit Electro Greens. Hoo-yah. Let's do this. Divine out. That is delicious.
Were you building the Hubble or maintaining it?
We were maintaining it. The Hubble was built to be serviced when they built this thing back, in the 70s, really, and into the 80s. It was initially supposed to launch in the early part of the shuttle program. It ended up getting delayed after it was delayed, and was going to launch in 1986. And then they had the Challenger accident in early 1986, and that shut down everything more or less from the manifest standpoint. So the thing was designed to be serviced by astronauts. It's this great instrument, but they also built it so that you could pull stuff off and put new stuff in. So just about everything on that telescope was designed with connectors or latches or bolts that you could take stuff out. Like the solar rays, you could take those things out, disconnect them, drive a couple of bolts and pull them out of there. So that was something you could do. All the instruments, whether it was a science instrument, a computer, a gyroscope, no matter what it was, whatever you had in there pretty much was designed that you could open doors if you needed to get behind the door to see what was there and then remove stuff and put new stuff in. We were doing servicing, which meant some stuff was busted and we needed to replace it for that reason. And other stuff was an upgrade in the technology, right? So you think of how like cameras have gotten so much better. That's kind of what a lot of those instruments are. They're using pixels and so on to see stuff. So as that technology got better and better, and other things like solar technology got better and a lot of things got better, we would put the new technology in. Even if the old thing was still working, we would give it upgrades. So it was upgrades and servicing what needed to be replaced.
Now that we've got the James Webb, which can see a lot further, is the Hubble still in service, or what's the status? Still?
Yeah, it still is. And we still use a lot of telescopes all over the planet, right? So it's not like, oh, we've got this really good one up there, so we could shut down these other things. Hubble, and that's the same for Webb. I mean, Webb is up there. Webb is designed and tuned to look in a very specific area of the light spectrum, in the infrared spectrum, where there's really you can't really see infrared, right? It's kind of like just picking up heat, very low light, because the idea there was to be able to try to look at the beginning, what they think is the beginning of the universe, at the time of the Big Bang, which was, they estimated at they'll probably update this, I would think, but 13.8 billion billion years ago.
It keeps getting longer and longer.
I think they're going to keep looking and go, oh, there's more out there. But at 13.8 billion years is what they thought. That's the age of the universe, we think. So Hubble could see about 13 billion light years. It didn't have that extra billion, like 0.800 million, let's say. Anyway, so the Webb is designed to look even further than Hubble. But Hubble carried all the lights, or pretty much the whole spectrum of light. So it can do other things that the Webb theoretically can't. But when you're looking at the same object, if you're able to see it with Webb, it's going to be much better, like a 1,000-fold better with the Webb. But still, Hubble is quite useful, as are a lot of the ground-based telescopes. Right. Yeah.
What do you think is from your perspective, the most interesting things that we've learned from putting those telescopes up there, either Hubble or Webb or both?
I think what we learned, Mark, is that we don't really know what the heck is going on around here.
I could have told NASA that.
Yeah, we have no idea. People make these theories and stuff, and then they find out, whoops, no, like the things that kind of blew my mind, it was things like, this was discovered before Hubble, but the dark matter.
It's like 98% of space is dark matter or something like that.
Yeah, I think it's like 90%, which means we don't know which really means we don't know what this stuff is. The rest of the stuff we can recognize, but they can tell because light will bend due to gravity. So when you get these really fancy telescopes out there, and they call it gravitational lensing. So you have an object, let's say, in the sky and up there, some far away place in the universe, and there's light bending around it. They can do a calculation of how that light would bend, how much matter should be there that would cause that amount of gravity to cause light to bend that much. And they can only recognize about 10% or so of that matter. So they're like, we don't know what it is. So they're calling that dark matter. So it's like an antimatter thing to look for. It's kind of like science fiction-y, but they just don't know what this stuff is. With Hubble, I thought one of the really cool things that they discovered was dark energy. So with Hubble, when it launched, there were things they were going to look for, like black holes, and they found them, and also like the planets in other solar systems, and they found that stuff too. But what they kind of stumbled upon, there was a few astronomers were trying to characterize and calculate the expansion rate of the universe, right? So the idea was you had this Big Bang, 13.8 billion years ago, and all this stuff got started, everything like this big explosion. And so all that material, let's say, all this stuff is like getting flung around and out through the universe. And so the idea is that, or the assumption is that as things go further out there, they start to slow down. It's like, throwing a baseball or a football, something you're going to throw it. The faster you can throw it, the further it's going to go, but eventually it's going to slow down and hit the ground. It'll slow down after it launches, let's say, right? And they found out that it wasn't decelerating, it was actually accelerating. So it's like you threw your football or your baseball or whatever you're throwing, and it doesn't slow down, it actually picks up speed as it gets further away from you, which is kind of nuts. There's this energy source that they don't know what it is, and that led to the awarding of a Nobel Prize, which is kind of a big discovery, although I was like, well, you don't even know what it is, but you still get the Nobel Prize. This is kind of cool. But they used some of the instruments we installed to determine that, so that was kind of fun to be a small part of that.
That's pretty cool. How did being in space change your perspective on what it means to be a human and Mother Earth and all that? 'Cause, I mean, it's so cool. Just even when we saw the first pictures, right, of the Earth, like from the moon with Neil Armstrong and those guys, it shifted something, right? So what was the big shifts for you?
I think there are a couple things, Mark. One is the thought that went through my mind. It was on my second spacewalk on my first flight when I really had a chance to look at the planet. Was I thought, oh, this is like a heavenly view, up and away, and you're looking down from heaven or something like. That was kind of the thought that went through my head. And then I thought, after that, I thought, no, man, this is more beautiful than that. This is what heaven must look like. And I really felt like I was looking into absolute paradise. And that's one thing, is that I think we're living in a paradise. And I know there's a lot of bad stuff going on. There's bad stuff going on probably right now as we're talking. We're going to find out about when we get off. Well, oh, geez, look what happened now. But the planet itself, I think, is beautiful and perfect, and we're so lucky to be here. And it made me realize that we really need to appreciate this place. You don't have to go to space for that. It's just in general, the people that are around us. It's an amazing place. I'm here in New York City, and even the buildings and the flow of traffic and people and this whole rhythm of life that we have here is pretty amazing. I live close to Central Park. I can go in there and see trees. That's kind of cool. You're out in San Diego. You've got I would say, probably a much nicer view of nature out there looking at the ocean. It's spectacular. It's just amazing that we get to live here every day, and just made me appreciate things more. Rain, you don't get any weather in space, but you get that down here. I feel like we're living in a paradise, and we are very lucky every moment we get to spend here. And then the other thing that hit me, it was on my second space flight at some point, going around the planet, and I had this, when I could look at the planet off my shoulder, I had the sense that is home. And it changed my thought of what home was. It's like, that's where I'm from. That's where everybody that I know, everybody that lived before me and after, as far as we know, everybody's here, right? And there's one spot. Everyone that's ever lived, everyone that's coming next, maybe we'll find life somewhere else eventually, but all we know about, everything is there. Everything is there. This is our home. And when I was a kid, I grew up in a just outside of New York City in a town called Franklin Square in Long Island. Like, that was my home, right? We never really went anywhere either. We stuck around the neighborhood mainly. That was home. And then as I got older and moved around a little bit and went to college, I think I identified more as a New Yorker as I moved around different places in the country. I'm from New York. And then as an astronaut especially, I think I identified as an American. But that was who I was. I'm an American. I represent our country. And I'm an American. But after going to space, it was sometime on my second flight, I started thinking really what home is our planet. And it's a place that we all share, no matter where you're from, around our country or other countries, we all share that same spot. So that's I guess what has changed is that we're living in a paradise, and we all share. Our home is Earth, and we all share.
That's right. I love that. You just described a progression from egocentric to ethnocentric to cosmocentric. Well, world and then cosmocentric, which is a classic developmental model that generally most people never really go beyond the egocentric, right? And you have some overlap between ego and ethics, like my country, my American exceptionalism, Chinese exceptionalism, that kind of stuff. But to get to a truly cosmocentric, or let's just say world-centric, where humanity, all of humanity is included in your circle of care and concern, all sentient beings, Mother Earth included, that's profound. I can see how going to space could create that shift, like spontaneously. Meditation, long-term meditation practice does it too. So I was thinking, kind of make a comment. You don't have to go to outer space. You can go to inner space as well to achieve similar benefits, right? That sense of just awe and beauty and connection. It's within all of us, right? One of my favorite meditations, Mike, is to view Mother Earth, right, in my heart or, in my body. When you meditate for a long period of time and you have this experience of allness where everything is included in your representation of what you believe to be your mind, then there's no boundaries, right? And that's what unity consciousness is like. I went off a little tangent there, but
I like it.
It's cool because I had a dream of going to space. I was a little late to the game, so it wasn't a realistic goal for me because I was already in my 30s. I had met William Shepard. Do you remember Bill Shepard?
Oh, yeah, Shep, sure, yeah.
He was my Navy SEAL buddy. I mean, he's a little older than me, but I met him, and I was a junior lieutenant, and he was kind of, we were all kind of fascinated because he was the first SEAL.
Yeah.
We had Cassidy come out with him, and then a guy named Lee. He's a Korean guy. Yeah. And then there's one more I think that got picked up. Anyway, so Bill was quite a character. Remember, he went to the space station. He was supposed to name it something different, and he came up with his own name.
I'm trying to remember. What do you remember? What it was, or what?
I should know that,
this,
but
right?
It'll come to me.
I should know this. Yeah, he was quite a character. Is right. He was the first commander of the space station.
Yes, he
was up there with two Russians, the very first expedition crew.
I think they wanted the SEAL up there to make sure that we could maintain control.
Having SEALs around are a handy thing. You should always have at least one in the office. So we had Shep, and then you always good to have one of them. They're very handy folks. Something, Cassidy was kept, like we dropped something in the pool. They used to do spacewalk training in they have a gigantic facility now, but we had a slightly smaller facility. And someone dropped something. I don't know what they dropped in there, but, well, who can go get it down there? And they call Cassidy. So he would go, it's always good. You never know. It's just made you feel better, not just about the water, but just in general, having a guy like that. Yeah, Shep was great, and Cassidy is a great guy, too.
But you met Neil Armstrong. I see that from your bio. He was an old timer, but was he there as a mentor, or how did that come about?
I think it was just luck. On our very first week as astronauts, he was in town getting his physical. They get like a yearly physical that you come back for. And our training coordinator, a nice lady by the name of Paige Maltzby, got wind of him being there and said, hey, we got these new astronauts. Do you want to come speak to them? And he was like, yeah. He said, but I only want to speak to the new class. I don't want to be, I don't want to be in a big auditorium with a lot of people. I just want to speak to the new guys. So he came in. Yeah, he was great. And what was interesting about it, he was really shy, like almost painfully shy. And he got up there. We gave him a good round. He was like almost embarrassed, it seemed like, for the attention he got. And he didn't even talk about walking on the moon. He got up there and he started talking about what it was like to fly the X-15 and being a test pilot.
Maybe he didn't walk on the moon after all.
No, he walked on the moon.
There's a lot of people who believe
asking
that.
him. We started asking him, and then he started telling us moon stories. No, he certainly did. He was a really interesting guy. There's no pictures of him on the moon. They had the one camera, and he took pictures of the other guy. So those iconic pictures of man on the moon are all Buzz Aldrin. Because can you imagine we take so many pictures now, going to the moon and not getting a photo of yourself? Being the first dude on the moon and not with a photo? Can you imagine? But he didn't care. He was all about the mission. And there was no names on the Apollo 11 patch. Most astronauts, in fact, all of them except for that one and Apollo 13 have names on them. Mine certainly do, every flight since. But he didn't want that. They decided as a crew, but I think it was mainly Neil saying, no, this is for Apollo 11, this is a world accomplishment.
You claim that he gave you some comically misguided advice.
When I first met him, I asked him, what he said, because I'm old enough to remember. I was 6 years old when he was on the moon, and I'm old enough to remember that. And I was a little kid watching that in my pajamas, and like that just blew my mind. I was like, these guys. It wasn't only that I thought space flight was cool. I thought those guys were cool. I want to grow up to be like Neil Armstrong. So he was my idol, and I got a chance to meet him as a new astronaut for the first time. The first time I met him was when he came to visit us to talk to us. And I asked him, not in front of the whole class, but it was like the next day I saw him on the lunch line. I was like, I got to say something to this guy. And I introduced myself and asked him, well, how did he come up with the thing he said on the moon? There's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Because I remember that as a little kid, and it was in all the papers and all that. That was it, man. I
always thought that he was scripted and given that. Said, here, you say this when you get.
That's what I thought. I'm like, how do you come, as I got old, I'm like, so that's what I asked him. How did you come up with that? Did you hire a publicist? Did your wife tell you to say that? Like, I thought that was probably someone come up with that thing. And he looks at me and he says, Mike, I didn't think about what I was going to say on the moon until after I landed on the moon. I'm like, what, really? And he says, yeah, Mike, if I didn't land on the moon, there'd be no reason to say anything. I was like, you got a point. And then he went on, I think he was used as a teaching moment with this brand new guy who's a civilian coming into this operational world now, right? So he said, Mike, you're new to this, but this is a dangerous business. And if you get distracted by all this public relations stuff, bad stuff can happen. So stick to your job. Don't get distracted. Worry about all that stuff later. And, just do your job. Concentrate on your job. And he's like, you got it? And I was like, I got it. So then years later, they asked me to send this first tweet from space. Very historic, right? I wasn't really thinking much about what I was going to say, of course, because I was taking my idol's advice. And in the very last press conference, NASA said I was going to send this first tweet from space. So I got asked about it in our final press conference. What are you going to tweet? Have you thought about it? I'm like, no. I'm channeling Neil Armstrong. And like, no, I'm not thinking about that. We've got to get to orbit first. If we don't get to orbit, there's no reason to tweet anything. I'm Neil Armstrong. I'm not worrying about any of that. We got the mission to worry about. We get to space, and I open up the computer, and I'm looking at that thing. I'm looking just like this, like staring at the computer, kind of floating there, and I realize I can't think of a thing. That advice I got was the worst advice I ever got in my life. Like, why did he tell me that? I can't think of a thing.
Now the pressure's on. Yeah.
Now the pressure's on, but then, Mark, after like a minute or so, I'm like, he lied to me. There's no way that this guy's on the moon. I'm sitting there, just floating, not even sitting, floating around. No one even, maybe a handful of people even know I'm up there. This guy, the whole world was listening, like everybody. Friend or foe, it didn't matter where you were around the planet. Everyone was listening to what this guy was going to say. And he's on the moon, right? He's on the moon for the first time ever of anybody. And he comes up with that. I go, he lied to me.
I think he did too. I'm a little bit of a skeptic around those things. Like, yeah, that's a good story that he didn't know what he was going to say, but that's too perfect.
I tell you what happened after is that I was watching the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11. They had like a lot of things about Neil Armstrong on, and they had an interview, and he died back, I think it was like 2012 or 2013. He passed away, and so he wasn't around, of course, for anything in 2019 on the 50th anniversary. But they had an interview with his brother, and his brother's there. It's like, oh, I was playing Monopoly with Neil right before he went to the moon. He passed me a little note, and I opened it up, and it said, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." And he said, "What do you think of that?" And I said, "Oh, I think it's pretty good." Like, and I gave Neil the thumbs up, and I'm like, "Ooh, there it is. There's the evidence."
It.
So I saw his sons, Mark and Rick, become friendly with his sons, and we were at some event again for this 50th anniversary back. There's a lot of stuff going on around different places. So I saw it. I go, "Look, let me ask you guys something. I saw this. Your dad. I told him what their dad had told me, and then I said I saw your uncle say that that your dad shared what he was going to say with him. I go, I forget the guy's name. Was it Uncle Billy or whatever?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that guy." And he goes, "Oh, you can't pay attention to that guy. He's always like trying to ride on Dad's coattails and making all kinds of claims. Dad didn't tell him anything. Dad probably never even played Monopoly with him. Like, don't pay attention on." And then one of his sons, I forget which one it was, but he turns to me and goes, "Mike, if Dad told you that was the truth." That's what I think is actually the truth. I think he had a poet in him. I'm not saying he didn't think about it ahead of time to come up with that, but I think he was true to his word. To me, he's a great
That's
hero.
amazing. Either way, it's pretty extraordinary. I don't know why the uncle would make that up, though.
I don't know, but it's a good story, Mark.
It's a good story. Most of life are good stories, right?
Yeah, that's right.
That's why we call it his story, right?
That's right.
It's not one story, it's his story.
I was talking to Jim Lovell, another one of my heroes, the Apollo 13 commander, and he was saying something about like the time they launched at 1313 or whatever it was, something like this. And I heard him say this to this crowd, and I go, "Jim, that time, you were on Eastern time, but that's Houston time. You're in the, the time really was an hour later or something." Whatever I said to him, and he goes, "Mike, never let the truth get in the way of a good story."
Were you an engineer by your educational training? Is that what you were in for?
Yeah. When I went to college, by that point I realized I felt like I was never could become an astronaut. That's impossible. I'm not a thrill seeker, Mark. I didn't like heights. I still don't like heights. I've had to learn to deal with them on certain occasions, but I'm fine in an airplane or a zip line or even a rappel, anything. As long as I'm moving, I'm okay. I don't like looking over the side of a building or anything. I'm fine in space, all right. But really what I'm afraid of is gravity. I don't like the idea of falling to my death. But I never saw myself as a thrill seeker, and so I can never do this. But when I was in college, my senior year, I saw this movie, The Right Stuff, when it's based on a book by Tom Wolfe. So I saw that movie, and it was about the original 7 astronauts, and it kind of rekindled my interest. But up to that point,
that was one where Chuck Yeager was really featured.
Yeah, Chuck Yeager was portrayed very heroically in there, and John Glenn and Alan Shepard, all those guys.
Great.
And it was like, this is cool, That got me interested again. But up until that point, I really never thought about any career in the space program. So once I saw that movie, then it kind of changed. I worked for IBM for a couple of years. I was an industrial engineer as an undergrad because I wasn't thinking about really what I was going to do other than getting a job and what I was interested in studying. So when I went to grad school, I worked for a couple of years, and I went to grad school for mechanical engineering and got into the space-related research, and that's what I did. I went the academic route to get to the astronaut office, the civilian academic route.
You didn't get in the first time. I think it took you 3 times. So how do you stay motivated? Because it seems like, the wicket is such a narrow, it's a narrow hoop to jump through.
Well, I realized when I wanted to do it, as Navy SEALs, I was reading up on you, Mark, and they're like 190 guys and 15 made it through or something like that.
Yeah, I had 185 in my class, and 19 of us graduated. 19? Pretty slim pickings there,
that's
too.
Pretty slim. This is a lot different. This is just an application. They didn't torture us. I don't want to last, they couldn't torture us. We went to like some of the, the survival school training, but if they would have hurt one of us, they would have gotten in trouble. It wasn't like what they did to it's completely different universe from what, your selection was like. But so ours was just like mainly paperwork and interview and stuff like that.
Don't like thousands of people apply for like 20 slots?
That's the thing, and guys like you mentioned, like Bill Shepard and Chris Cassidy, people like that who are really sharp with, who have great military backgrounds, but also great academic backgrounds. Both of those guys have master's degrees from MIT, for Christ's sake. They're really high-performing people, and the civilians were like that too. We didn't have the military background, but they had other things going on which were incredible. And when you have that many people who are qualified and high performers trying to get just a few slots, it's kind of impossible. And so I realized that, it's very unlikely, but it's not impossible.
Right.
The only way it's impossible is if I didn't try. Then it's not. No one's going to knock on my door to be a NASA astronaut. No one's going to like give you the opportunity to be a SEAL, right? You're going to have to go through those trials. They're not going to knock on your door. You know, you gotta seek it out and do whatever you need to do to try to get in. The least that I could do is just keep trying. So as you say, I got rejected twice outright. You know, so you keep applying, and then they go to a selection. And so the first selection I got rejected. The second one I got rejected outright. The third one, I got an interview and then got medically disqualified for my eyesight. So I did some vision training to get my eyes better. This is not an issue anymore. All the training standards have changed. This is, you know, going back however many years that was, like 30 years ago. The standards have all changed. But back then you had to see pretty well with uncorrected vision, and I couldn't do it. So I did some training, was able to get a couple extra lines on the eye chart because I just wanted to try. You know, if I was going to be told no, I wanted them to tell me no. Like, hey, we've got all these other people out. I didn't want to be just medically ditched. So I was able to overcome that. So at least I could try again. And then the fourth time I applied, I got the interview and everything went well and I got picked. My view of success now is a little bit different because you can't guarantee that you're going to be successful at what you're trying to do. But that doesn't mean it's not worthwhile to try. And so I feel like as long as you're trying, that's success. As long as you're pursuing whatever that goal is and not giving up no matter what happens to you, that to me is the definition of success. You might not be able to make it through, and sometimes it's factors beyond your control, but certainly you shouldn't be the one pulling the plug on what you want to do. Let other people do that to you. You know, you should just hang in there as much as you can.
Embrace the journey and the challenges and the lessons and be surprised by where it leads you.
That's the other thing, Mark, is that you know, you never know where that journey is going to take you. After that second interview, when I was waiting to hear, right? And I was on vacation with my family. My kids were little, and I was teaching at Georgia Tech, and we went to, I think, San Simon or one of those islands off of Georgia. And we were on the beach, and I was saying, you know, I was thinking to myself, you know, if I get rejected, which is probably going to happen, I'm going to apply again. You know, I was still young enough at that point to try again. But I was like, if it ends here, if I never get in, if I get told no again, I'm in a pretty nice spot. You know, it gave me motivation to get more education. I learned to fly airplanes. I got my scuba license. You know, and I did a lot of really cool things with NASA, a lot of cool experiences. And I was set up as a professor doing space research at Georgia Tech, and life was pretty good. And I think it's good to have, when you're motivated and you try and you keep pushing yourself to do things that are out of your comfort zone, all of a sudden stuff starts happening you can never even imagine. So I think you're right. The journey, what's going to be in front of you, you have no idea. If you're pursuing something, you never know what's going to come your way.
I've been asked a question similar to the one I'm about to ask you, but I'd love to hear your perspective as an astronaut. But people think that Navy SEALs don't experience fear, and I said that's like everyone experiences fear. Fear is just a natural occurring thing. It's how we deal with it that makes the difference. So how do you, either individually or how are you trained as an astronaut to really manage fear and stress and the intense, you know, environments and turn that into, you know, success?
You know, again, this is new for me, Mark. I was not a military guy and not a high adventure guy. So a lot of these things were new for me to be put in situations where I was scared. I think to me, there are like two categories, maybe. I'm just making this up now, Mark.
I love when you're thinking to yourself, I can't wait to see what comes out of my mouth next.
Yeah, so here we go. So I don't know what's going to come out. But I think it is actually one I've talked about before. There's times where you don't have time to think, right? There are times you don't have any time to think. And there are other times where you can think, right?
Right.
So let's say you're in one of those situations where you don't have time to think. I've only been in a couple of those, and I don't think anywhere near what you've experienced. But it was an airplane incident. We had a hydraulic failure, and we thought we might have to eject out of the aircraft because you can't control the aircraft. We had about 20 minutes to get on the ground, and we were going through the ejection sequence. And I remember thinking, you should be scared right now, but being scared is not going to help. Being scared, if it paralyzes you right now, this could be really bad, right? So I needed to think, and so we lie on the checklist, and I was with a buddy, and we're going through the checklist, and we're going to remain calm. We're not going to panic because that could kill us in this situation. So it was like, being scared is not going to help. And I never thought I would react that way. It happened to me once in space as well when I had a problem during a spacewalk. And I was like, you should be scared right now. But I was like, no. That's not going to help right now. So I think part of that was, part is like realizing that being scared is not going to help, or it could really be a problem. And that was, I would say, in the category where I felt like I didn't have time to think. I didn't have time to be scared. Being scared is a luxury. There are other times, like when I was going on the spaceship, I remember looking up at the shuttle for the very first time, and it looked like a beast, man. It was like all ready to go and fueled. And smoke's coming off of it, and it's making these really horrible noises, and I'm standing there looking up at this freaking beast that looked angry, and I was like, it looked alive, and I realized, maybe this wasn't such a good idea. But
It's a little late to have that thought.
Right. I actually thought about running for it, but they're just going to run me down. There's all these security guys with these big weapons around us, and they weren't there for terrorists. They were there to make sure we were going to get on. I was convinced because they're looking right at me. I go, shouldn't you guys be looking over there for bad guys? But they're like, nah.
But Mike guy's he's a risk. He's a flight risk.
Yeah, that's right. They were I think they knew what was going through. I think that probably someone warned them, like, all these rookies, keep an eye on them. They're the ones that, make sure, So I was like, well, I got to go. But the thing that I learned in those situations is, like, you have to trust. Like, okay, wait a minute. Trust your training. My name wasn't picked out of a hat. I'm ready to go. I know the procedures. We just refreshed all the emergency procedures. It's like the last thing you do before you get on board. If something happens, we're going to be able to act and hopefully take care of it. But I've been trained, and I'm ready to go. They wouldn't let me go if I wasn't qualified to go. We are trained. I'm going to rely on my training. So that was one. The second trust was trust your gear. We needed things to work. We needed more parachutes or any of our emergency equipment, the shuttle itself, all the stuff that we had, from the stuff we were wearing to the stuff we were going to use inside. All that gear is going to be there for us. It's going to work for us. So trust your training, trust your gear, and then trust your team. Life's an open book test, and I had 6 other crewmates with me. I had a control center full of people that are going to be looking out after us. And if we needed help, they were going to be just as involved as we were in coming up with a solution. So trust your training, trust your gear, trust your team. And then that allowed me to trust myself. And those trusts, I think that's what you have to, when you get a little worried about getting like, oh crap, how did I get myself in this situation? You're ready for it, and you have to be able to engage it. I think being nervous is okay about things way ahead of time. It would be like, oh man, what happens if this happens, if that happens? And then it's okay. That's good, if you're nervous, because it shows that it matters, I think.
That nervousness causes you to think through contingency plans. Yeah.
But once you get to the moment, I found like, okay, that's done. Now it's time to execute. Yeah. And let's execute the plan. The time for being nervous, that's not going to help now. What we need to do is rely on the training and the tools and the team, and let's go execute the plan. So
right on. Love it. Man, I could talk to you for hours. This is so much fun. But we got to wind down pretty soon. A couple more questions. So NASA's kind of focused on going to the moon with the Artemis program, and Elon's focused on going to Mars. Hopefully NASA and Elon will work together on that one.
I think so.
What's your perspective on where we are today, United States, in terms of our space programs? Are we moving forward? Is it good, or are we in the doldrums?
No, I think it's good, Mark. I think it's overall good. I think what happened, I didn't really realize this was going on at the time, but as the shuttle was winding down, there was an emphasis put on. We knew we needed another spaceship. It was after the second accident. I was like, all right, we're going to fly a few more flights, and then we're going to retire this thing. We need another spaceship, of course. So I think we were kind of thinking, well, it'd be like a new space shuttle or something. But then what NASA did is they started a commercial crew program where they started to fund a few companies, and they downsized the competition after a few rounds, and they settled on SpaceX and Boeing. So the Starliner that's up there now is part of that program, and the SpaceX Dragon that's been going up and down for the past few years, that's part of that program. But at the time when it was first brought up, we were like, we don't know if this is such a great idea, but we do have, in this country, we have a lot of good things, I think. I think the military and NASA and the science we're able to produce as a government, our government agencies, I think, do a pretty good job of that. I think in some cases a great job of it. I think NASA was a little bit constrained because being a government agency, when it was developing a new spaceship, for example, that tax dollar was spread around different places. And it's the tax dollar you're dealing with. You can't spend it you can't spend all that money. You can't spend all the tax dollar. You're going to be given a budget, right? NASA is. And so I think they're maintained pretty well, and kind of like national parks, sort of. Everyone likes them, but you're not going to bet the farm on them. So I think NASA realized that we can't do everything we want to do, but you have this amazing entrepreneurship and an American economy and technology that can be used to, if you could direct it towards space travel. I mean, look at airplanes, for example. That was mainly a military government development for World War I and then World War II. And then eventually it became a thriving commercial airline industry once commercial activity and companies got involved. And I think that's what we're seeing now with space travel. So I think the government will always have a role. But I think to do all these things they've dreamt about for decades, to go to Mars and settle on the moon and all that. The government, I don't think, can afford to do that. They've teamed up with other countries. That's been helpful. But I think teaming up with industry, and it's industries, the companies are around the world that are coming up with all kinds of ideas, and they're getting investments from all over the place. So it's not just money coming from the government. So I think overall that's a good thing. It's showing benefits. I mean, the amount of launches of not just people but satellites and experiments and all kinds of stuff.
Incredible. We watched the launches from Vandenberg off our back deck over the ocean.
Oh, cool.
In the Pacific. It's really cool. We watched them launch the is it Starlink, the satellite?
Yeah.
So they'll go up, and then you see these little pods go out in these little lights. It is really cool.
Yeah, this whole commercial stuff. So overall, I think it's a good thing. I think there's always going to be a role for governments to do stuff. I think there'll always be government astronauts like NASA, or at least for a long time anyway. But I think that kind of mix of industry and government, I think, is a good thing.
Yeah. Last question. A lot of military pilots have claims to, have run-ins with unidentified vehicles that defy, the laws of physics as we know it.
Yeah.
What's your take on that? Or do you think we're alone? Do you think these things are real?
Well, overall, I think there's got to be someone else out there. I think that, you look at what Hubble has shown us and what Webb is showing us as well. There are billions of galaxies with billions of stars in each one of those.
Incredible.
That's a big number, Mark. I don't know what
number.
number that is, but that's big. Most of these stars have multiple planets orbiting around them. So there's a lot of possibilities. And as we're getting the technology and the ability to analyze even our own solar system, we're finding the signs of the building blocks of life, not signs of life, but looking out at the moons of Jupiter. They thought they're frozen, they're far away from the sun, and they're made of ice, but they thought they're just frozen solid. But what they've discovered is they're warmer than what they expected.
They're like frozen with ocean underneath them.
That's right. So we think that a lot of scientists think that life began in the ocean here. There's possibilities out there. That doesn't mean there's anything at all out there. But just to find these building blocks within our own solar system, imagine what we might find elsewhere. So I do think there's life out there somewhere. As far as like the UFOs go, I think a lot of it is illusions. Sometimes, it's like the brain tries to make sense of something, and they make some optical illusions. And so a lot of that stuff can be explained, or it's, some a drone, or who knows what it is, or maybe it's a classified aircraft or something, and they don't know about it. But that's maybe 90 or 95% of that stuff. There's still that 5 to 10%. They don't know what the heck this stuff is. That doesn't mean it's ET. That's like a big leap that, we don't know what it is. It's got to be ET. But I don't know about that, because you need real evidence for that. But certainly there are things, that high altitude balloons or other things that maybe shouldn't be flying in certain places and are. We should know what's going on. So I think identifying what those things are important. And NASA put together a committee to study these UFOs. And it was a serious group of people. My astronaut classmate and friend Scott Kelly was on this.
I met Scott. I did a podcast with him a while ago. He had a twin brother. The twin brothers were up in space, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah. His brother was in the talk to become a vice presidential candidate until today. But that's a whole other story.
He didn't make it, but he...
No, that's a whole other story. We don't want to go there, I don't think. Politics. But yeah, that's the guy. So Scott was on his committee, along with a bunch of other really serious scientists. The guy that was the head of this committee was a guy named Matt Mountain. And Matt was the head of the Space Telescope Science Institute when my first flight was up. So the Space Telescope Science Institute takes all the data from Hubble and Webb and other places. And, this is a pretty, it's incredible bunch of astronomers and scientists and other people on this committee. And what they found was that, we can explain a lot of this stuff, but there's still that 5 to 10% that we don't know what it is. I doubt that it's ET, because that's quite a leap. But I do think with stuff that we need to try to figure out what it is. So, and I do think there's life out there. I think that we're going to hopefully find more signs of it as the time goes on, and then maybe make a connection. But I think it's got to be. I don't think there's any reason to think that we're the only ones here.
No, it's just curious, because I agree with you. That 5%, that factor, and then, there's just little data points that pop up, at least in my consciousness. Like one of them that really just got me scratching my head was there was a 4-star Israeli Mossad general. Who had retired, and he came out and he said, okay, I'm just going to say this. I got nothing to lose anymore. I'm retired. I'm going to get canceled for this or killed, but we're already working with aliens.
Really?
In a secret base on Mars. And I was like, what? He just said that? Days later, I tried to find that comment. I tried to find reference. And it's gone.
Ooh.
It's gone. I know, isn't that cool? It's like, what? And then the other thing that always blew my mind is the Air Force's X whatever plane, right? The like little mini X-33.
That's a real thing.
It's a real thing, yeah. And
Yeah.
I've seen it land out at Edwards Air
Yeah.
Force Base. This thing goes up,
Yeah.
disappears for like 9 months,
Yeah.
and then it comes back and nobody says anything. Like,
Yeah.
where the heck is it? Mike?
It's in orbit. No, I don't think that thing.
Maybe
No, I don't
it's
think
at Mars.
that thing. No, I don't think it's good. There's no way. I don't think that would be interesting. But I think that's an orbital vehicle. I don't think.
Okay,
there's
so
something
it's
else.
orbiting with another platform.
No, I think it's just going around. I think they're just collecting data on it. I really don't know, Mark. I mean, probably.
What do they need to collect 9 months of data? Like that's just a puzzle to me. It's like one of those things that just doesn't add up. The official story.
I would say, is trying to take data on radiation exposure, maybe readings in the upper atmosphere.
I know you're
To me,
probably
that
right.
makes
I'm just
sense. I've got to try to make sense of this. To say they're sending this thing to Mars to hang out with ET, why don't they let us know about that? I mean, this is big. This is the thing. I mean, this is big news.
They don't think humanity is ready. If it's at all true, they don't think
I
humanity.
mean, I don't think. No, first of all, I don't think they could hide it. We learn everything now with cell phones. There's someone that's going to slip. They're sending like a probe to, whatever it is, a bunch of people to Mars to start working with the aliens.
that you would think that we would know
Yeah,
about
man.
that.
I don't see how you cover that one up.
If the news breaks someday, you and I got to connect and say, "See,
Yeah, I'm going to be pissed they didn't let us know about it. I mean, they got to let us know. I mean, why hide this sort of stuff? That's what I never understood. Like with these alien sightings of people who have been abducted and everything. Why do they always go, the aliens in these stories, they always go like to the middle of nowhere? I would go to San Diego. I never mind New York.
the middle of Manhattan."
I just don't think we can cover these things up. So, and there's no real credible evidence. So I'm just, saying, well, no, it can't be ET yet. So it's got to be something else.
We'll see, right?
Well, I hope so.
Hopefully, we'll too."
Hey everyone, this is Mark Devine, founder of SealFit and Unbeatable Mind, and I'm super stoked to announce that my new book, Uncommon, is due out from St. Martin's Press this summer, July 16th. And we've launched a pre-order campaign. You can learn more about that at readuncommon.com to try to get early awareness for the book, which I hope will help a lot of people, where I go and do a deep dive on the 5 mountains of personal mastery: physical, mental, emotional, intuitional, and spiritual. Uncommon, simple principles for an extraordinary life. Check it out at readuncommon.com, and thank you for your support and being part of the change that you want to see in this world. Hoo-yah, Divine out.
Mike, what a great time! Thank you so much for your conversation. I
I
really
really appreciate it. No, it was an honor. Great talking
We
with
didn't
you.
even talk about your book, Moonshot, but
Don't worry about it. I really want to know about more of your life. We should do this in reverse. I'll come on your podcast. I want to hear more of your stories,
you
man.
can interview me. That
Those are the
sounds
cool
good.
one. Yeah. All right, man.
All right, my friend.
Thanks, buddy.
Take care now.